Hey everyone, it's a special Saturday night edition of Not Playing Politics with Alexander Keaton and Nick Bradshaw. Nick, say hi to the nice people.
Hello, nice people.
Wow. Quality comedy right here. So, first of all, let me say I'm sorry we weren't here with y'all on Thursday. Unfortunately, I was out ill. I had some sort of a stomach thing and just laid me out. I have been tested for that good COVID, but I won't know until Monday. So, I'm currently in my office all holed up. That having been said, we missed y'all on Thursday, so we thought we'd come and give y'all an extra special Saturday evening edition, and just cover our bases here. But because it's not like I think one or two things have occurred this last week that we may want to discuss. Obviously, Nick, I think the first thing we need to say is all prayers and good wishes for a speedy recovery for the president and the first lady and all of the other people who were seemingly recently infected by COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, it doesn't change any of our postures on how we felt about every single person that this has impacted. I think it's been a reminder maybe to a lot of people that this can touch anybody anywhere. But I mean, our position remains the same. Our thoughts and prayers go to everybody who's had this been impacted. I've had friends who have lost family members. I've, been in situations just recently as today. I was in a situation where I really haven't been out much at all. And all jokes aside, that you need to get out more. It was bizarre to see other people in some of the places without masks or maybe closer together than I thought. And I found myself in a position I hadn't really been in. And that was, as humans, we kind of desensitize to things, right? Whether it's,
right.
Desensitizing to something like potentially COVID, desensitizing to, in graduate school, I did some work on exposure to mediated violence in adolescence and what that kind of desensitization hypothetically would look like, or the process it may follow, or what kind of fallacious ideas you had to have. But I bring all this up to say it's a reminder bringing us back to the wheelhouse here, that our prayers are with everybody. Of course, we pray for First Lady Melania, President Trump, those affected in the White House, those affected in our forms of government, just recently those that are coming to the surface, but in no different and with no more sincerity than we do for every other person, be they in Cambodia, the North Pole, or down the street from you. It was a stark reminder. It sure was.
No, absolutely. That's very well said. It's unfortunately, this has been so politicized that it's truly disgusting. The simple fact of the matter is, can't we at least all be human first and just recognize that these are humans who are sick? And for President Trump, who's older, right, he's a little bit more in the crosshairs, but at the moment, everything seems to be going well, and that we wish him a speedy recovery, as we do everyone who's been touched by this disease.
Well, I think what you're seeing is not, I don't necessarily attribute it to rebelliousness. I just think that people are sick and tired of it, and they're just burned out, and they're just exhausted. And, as a person walking by today, and they were just like, oh, did I need to have my mask? It's like, you leave one in the car, you've got one in the house. It's the new wallet, right? It's the new
Right.
iPhone. It's something that has worked its way into our society, and you grab the face mask. And again, I'm not here to push any agenda or any perspective from either side. I'm just saying it was a reminder for us to keep this in the forefront. We don't have the vaccine yet. We're not at herd immunity yet. And I'm not trying to be a fearmonger. I just think that it was a reminder, and that's why you're seeing it chew up a lot of the news cycle and go places. Of course, the president being someone who is just, by the daily interactions of how his job works, forget campaigning. I'm talking about the people that pass through the White House. I mean, anybody who has watched The West Wing knows that, you're going to get Sam, you're going to get CJ, or you're going to get someone to come into your office a lot. And it just happened.
I don't think they still work there anymore.
Well, I had a friend I had a conversation with earlier tonight. Hopefully she's listening. So a shout out to my team in the South. But she brought up a point. She goes, it kind of feels almost like this was inevitable, because it's just, I don't want to say the nature of it, but the president is constantly inundated with people.
Right.
And that's just the way that it is.
Right. No, and I would agree to that. I think this is one of those things where, and maybe we should probably look at doing this a little bit later on. Just neither of us are medical experts, so there's really no point in really having a broader conversation about the whole COVID-19 thing. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, the fact of the matter is, it's a virus. There's only so much you can do to protect yourself. That's sort of this whole point. And really in my own life, like I said, I got sick. I was down for like a day. Like I said, I have gone in, I've gotten it checked. I'll learn on Monday or Tuesday, but the doctor or the nurse practitioner I spoke with who did the thing, they just said, look, this is, you probably just have a stomach thing, but that's why you have to, again, take your vitamins, take your supplements. You need to have a healthy immune system because there's only so much you can do to prevent something from getting in. Unless you want to live in a hermetically sealed bubble, you can't protect yourself from everything. So you have to actually protect your body by making sure your body's defenses are strong.
Sure.
But so again, that's as far as I want to go. I don't even want to talk about the trolls online. They get enough attention on their own. So
I just feel pity. I really, real quickly to end on that note, because I'm with you. I don't want to even lend credibility or attention to it. It's just, I don't, it's so easy to look and be angry. Oh, well, how can they want something bad to happen? You know what? I really do. I just feel sadness. I feel sadness and concern that people can live in darkness like that. I don't wish that on anybody. To live in a place that you think wishing ill will to someone makes it witty so that you get likes on a Facebook page. I mean, how myopic a perspective must you have? How sad and lonely is the dark path you're following? I mean, I really do hope that it brings enlightenment to some people and it opens their hearts to think differently, because it's a real shame to see that. But you're right. Moving on to the next subject.
Right. Well, and ironically, we may touch back on that on your question a little bit later in the show. But obviously, we had the debates, and here's the thing: I don't think we're really going to say anything at this point that anyone hasn't already said. I think the president didn't help himself the way he did it. I think he missed a real opportunity to simply step back and a little bit and allow the former vice president, to hang himself metaphorically, because that's the big weakness that Biden has, is that he really can't speak extemporaneously. He is not as sharp as he once was. And the problem is Trump bailed him out numerous times.
Well, I think if we're being honest in this election, and I was thinking about this the other day, again, don't think I'm groundbreaking here, but I'd say like this: the more I've thought about it, the more I've talked to people about it, I can't get a pro-Biden feel. All I get is an anti-Trump feel. So to me, the election really is, and to friends that I've talked to about this who have mentioned, hey, I just want, to get Trump out, or I just want things to go back to the way they were, or I just think that Biden can bring about a level of calmness or a level of whatever it may be, whatever their intention. And I believe that they're doing it because they believe that it's good for the country. I don't think that they're subversive or, anything like that. But I don't see that there's any energy for pro-Biden. And they've demonstrated that. I mean, their strategy is stay off the radar, ride this thing out to the finish line. Kamala Harris has given virtually no attention to the media. And this is bizarre that we're in an age of presidential election, and we literally are not talking to two of the candidates,
Right.
With nearly the impassioned capabilities to uncover the verifiable truth. But I would say simply, look, what we've seen is pro anti-Trump. That's the vote, and I think that's really what it really is. I don't know that I don't want the other guy gets you across the finish line. I think you have to be fired up to do it. The polls look like they're tightening in a lot of ways. After the debates and the COVID diagnosis, I recently saw a poll that said that they're now almost they're within the margin of error,
Right.
even on the national level. So we'll see. I think if the president, and of course, what's most important is that people's health and that they recover and safely, and that's what we want for the welfare of our country. But I do believe that, if we can, potentially address this, maybe from the perspective of perhaps by having an example of people that we now see publicly make it through this instead of just statistics. You know, we
Right.
don't know somebody in Tacoma, Washington, but if the, you know, Senator Mike Lee or First Lady Melania Trump or whomever, if they can recover, you can go, oh my goodness, like, well, they made it through. Well, why can't I make? I've got an immune system. Why can't I make it through? And
Oh,
maybe
exactly.
that can change some of the arithmetic.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I think that may be something worth exploring. Maybe something, and really something the that the Trump administration should put out there. In fact, there's a lot of things I think the Trump administration should be putting out there in ads and surrogates that they just haven't done yet, and I don't understand why. But an interesting thing that I did note, like you said, that as the polls are tightening, apparently Hispanics did believe that Trump won that debate.
Well,
They
I mean,
actually
according to
found
the
him.
polling, yeah. Oh, go. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I was going to say it wasn't just a belief. I mean, you'll probably talk about this in a minute. I mean, talk about the percentage.
Right. No, exactly. It's they flat out is that he tested very well with the Hispanic community. They viewed that it was a success. And I spoke to my wife who was born in Colombia, and she said, "Yeah, that makes perfect sense to her. That people from the Hispanic community would have seen that, where maybe those of us who are coming from a more European tradition would have seen. You know, we're sort of used to more formal, very dispassionate arguments over policy. For the Hispanic community, it is about machismo and it is about dominance, and it looked very much, honestly, it looked like a telenovela. It actually played very well with certain Hispanic groups, and amazingly well. So maybe this is one of those things where it depends more on who you ask. Like I said, I thought there were some opportunities missed, but maybe in the long run, that was exactly what needed to happen.
Well, I mean, again, to that, I saw a poll that went as high as 2/3, 67% of those who watched it of the Latin community felt that Trump won, and I think that was very much reflective upon the fact that you're right. I mean, Trump takes up all the oxygen in the room, and I don't say that dismissively or disrespectfully. I just mean factually, and we all know people like that, and I think that it's interesting to look at the perspective and see what it is. Again, I don't know that it moved the needle necessarily in a sweeping way, but to your point, if this was a 67% and that number holds true and it translates into applicable votes, then it absolutely was. It could be a watershed moment in the campaign. But what I would say is more so that I've seen or been interested in is to see what appears to be a general attitude, and that is the Trump campaign wants to get out, engage, and have that process. The Biden campaign from the very beginning has been extremely withdrawn the whole way, and now with Kamala as vice presidential candidate, it's the same thing. It's very, very, very withdrawn, and I think I think that from a cultural perspective, be it Latin or Northern European or however you want to look at it. I think that the words that you could say, whether you liked his performance or not, I felt that there was a bit of a missed opportunity as well. But I felt that there was certainly one person in the room that was driving the ship. And as much as people may have said that, Chris Wallace was even against Trump, well, then Trump's in that underdog role that he likes to come out swinging. And when you're the underdog, you can kind of come out swinging, and people are going to kind of back you on it, I think, sometimes. And Biden only looked like he was swinging when they were insults. You clown, you racist, shut up, man. Oh, but I respect the presidency of the United States. This isn't me even trying to be anti-Biden. It's me trying to be hypocritical to the fact that it's always these declarations of this is what I think, feel, and believe, but these are the things that I do. And I worry. Not worry, correction. I think that people that resonated with that, like Trump or not, you got him. And in the debate, you got him 3,000%. And I'll be quite honestly, for me, it was hard to watch. It was distracting. You're absolutely right. There have been others that have made comments on this, that with the debate perspective, you put a phrase out there. Okay, so you're saying you're not for the Green Deal? Pause. Okay, I want to make sure. You're saying you're not for the Green New Deal? Pause. But forget Wallace. At times, Trump was cutting himself off, I believe.
Oh, exactly. No, in fact, here's the thing. Right. No, exactly. And I think that's one of those times where particularly when he said, "Oh, I'm not for the Green New Deal," but then later on, Biden references the Green New Deal. Like there were some genuinely interesting missed opportunities. All Trump had to do was get out of his own way. He literally saved Biden a couple of times. Now, I'm not necessarily of the he was having to fight the moderator and Biden. I'm not necessarily in agreement with that. I don't think that the moderator was as antagonistic as people believe. I think Trump set himself up to be in that position.
I don't know
because of how he handled the debate.
Yeah, I don't know that I would say the moderator necessarily was striking against Trump. I think he dropped the ball a couple times where he could have moderated better and could have gone back and said, "Mr. Vice President, are you saying this?" What I found interesting was
that I completely agree with.
Towards the end of the debate, he became very kind of not proselytizing, but it was very like, "Will you now make a pledge?" You could see his bias come out when he'd say things like, "Well, I don't understand why you look at certain things." I mean, he would change fundamental words. And I'll word it like this. For people who align with critical race theory, if I were some massive supporter of critical race theory and somebody said to me, "Well, I don't understand what the problem is," it's basically just racial sensitivity training. If I were a true follower of critical race theory and endorsed that would turn me off. I'd be like, "Wait a minute, that's not what? You just reduce this down to, a simplicity that it doesn't, that's not what we're trying to accomplish." Now, I have myriad lists of things that I could go down towards with regard to critical race theory, but that reduction of it kind of just went unhindered, and then when Biden said, "Oh, well, I wish I could get a word in," and the moderator said, "Oh," or something to the effect of, that was, "Don't you wish we could do more of that," or something, and the moderator's like, "Oh yeah, me too." You don't want to make an ally. Neither candidate should be an ally or an enemy. You're there in the middle. And I felt that while I think Wallace missed an opportunity, I think Wallace also felt as though from the word go, it was being ripped from his hands entirely.
Right. No, and that so I agree with.
Tried to get it back and look as though he was being, he was distributing it equally, but I don't know that that's what happened.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And I think this again goes back to, I think Trump. When Trump drives the ship, the problem is it puts him you've put Mike Wallace in that position of being antagonistic, right? Because it's like he's supposed to. It's like, again, he's the moderator. Allow him to moderate, and if he's not doing it well, attacking him as often as he did, as President Trump did, doesn't help your case with people who are watching. And here's the thing. It is ultimately going to come down to a very small number of people who haven't made up their mind. Now, again, this is our opinion. It could be that this does play very well with a lot of people. Maybe like, well, maybe he had to come out swinging because of this, right? So I think there's a lot where we may have a disagreement on this with how he did this. There may be a lot of other people for whom this played very differently. And I'd like to keep that in mind. But the one thing that does stand out with this, and I think this sort of ties into this whole sort of theme that we've really had, is I do agree that I think there were some times that Mike Wallace absolutely just went over the line. And he was clearly anti-Trump because he didn't hold Biden to the same standard. He certainly wasn't coming after him in the same way. He wasn't asking the same questions. It's like, fine, you want to go after Trump for his taxes? Well, then let's ask, why aren't we going after Biden on a lot of these legitimate questions, right? About his taxes, about money that he's got coming in, and from where. If the question of taxes are going to come up, we got to talk about that. Why aren't we talking? It's like, if you're going to, again, he asked Trump's like, are you going to denounce white supremacist groups? Well, it's not like Mr. Wallace hasn't and isn't keenly aware of all of the times he's done that very publicly. Well, why? Why was he even asking that, considering it's happened so many times? And why isn't he then turning around and asking that of Biden, who has some very legitimate and very recent examples of flagrantly racist attitudes and beliefs?
I mean, again, if we're trying to present the perspective that there's an imbalance in terms of representation of the media, we're about, some people would say 4 years too late, but I disagree. We've talked about this on the show many times. With the monetization and the new implementation of generating revenue streams on a digital platform. I mean, I think we went almost to an entirely and exclusively opinion-based publication and news outlets, such as this show. But whether it's this show or any of the 400 million shows that are out there, that's where we are. And because the access, I mean, again, the beauty of it is that it grants access to everyone, but the danger of that is that it grants access to everyone. And I am much more to the liberty-based side of granting access to all free peoples, of course. But I feel that comes with a mindful tone that we have to walk, or mindful tone that we have to be aware of, because again, you get cuckoo clocks, and then you get the ability for things to be warped by those who have the resources to do it, whether it's big tech or the media or wherever you want to see it. That's where it is. For me, where it came down to a social disconnection was when Biden made the comment about Antifa. And as someone who has physically been present when Antifa showed up, they didn't look like they were trying to beat people with ideas. They looked like they were trying to beat people, period. And
no, exactly.
that's where I fundamentally disagree, and I think he's disconnecting things. And he keeps trying to cite Christopher Wray, the FBI director, and state it from the perspective of, his own FBI director said that this is an idea. Sure, so is socialism, so is communism, so is Nazism. So I mean, yes, I got it. Good point. But those ideas are backed up by action. You just saw a story come out recently in the last couple hours about a gunman that they're hunting down who literally was live firing at a Trump event.
Yeah. Well, and a real quick comment on the Christopher Wray comment, even that's out of context, because Christopher Wray himself said, yeah, Antifa is more of an idea than an organization. However, he then follows up by saying Antifa is a very real thing. Like to your point, at this point, there is no organized Nazi party, and yet we would talk about neo-Nazis as a real thing all the time. In fact, it's the entire premise of so many of these arguments that are had, right? It's like neo-Nazis, white supremacists. Well, you would never say neo-Nazism and white supremacism they're just ideas. They're not real. Of course they're real. They may be ideas as well, but they are real because it's an ideology that's being followed by people. Same thing with Antifa. Antifa is an ideology, of course, but it is an organization that it may not be centralized, but it is acted out by people. This is a real thing. It is not some imaginary boogeyman hiding under the sheets. And more to that point, like you said, the violence at the Trump rally. And this is not me stating anything, so I'm just going to be very, very, very clear here. I am not stating that this is a known connection between the shooter in Las Vegas that shot into the country crowd a few years back. What I know for a fact, though, is because I saw it with my own eyes, is that after the event, immediately after the event, I think it was the Sydney branch of Antifa on their Facebook page said, "Congratulations, comrade. Thank you for striking at the enemy." Now, does that mean the shooter, actually was an Antifa member who had organized this and set all this up as some sort of act on their behalf? That doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that that Antifa as a group does encourage and support violence against those they believe to be their enemies. This is a violent group of people with a violent ideology, and it's not theoretical, it's not hypothetical, it is factual, and we see it all the time.
I understand why, anybody, ourselves included, want to speak and tread tread softly, right? But carry a big stick when it comes to the perspective of looking into the, the big C word, conspiracy, right? I don't necessarily think it has to be a conspiracy. In fact, I think this ties back very much to what we were just talking about with regard to Biden's comment. I think it is simply put into action the applicable decisions that someone makes when they buy into this. It's an idea, not a violent movement. That's
Right.
what it is. It's what you're seeing. I mean, it's not, people many times. I don't know the specific title. I'm certainly not a psychologist, but I would say, the people that when they become obsessed with someone and then they get to that point that because they love them so much, they have to kill them. And it's this feeling of whatever it may be that they use to justify that. Many of these people see it from the perspective of, if I can do this, again, when you have been told for years and heard things about this is a constitutional threat, these are the Nazis, this is the worst thing ever, these are enemies of the state. I mean, look at the language that they've been using. What's left? What is left other than a sitting senator to stand up and be like, oh, F this, screw you guys, what's left? And people hear it and we get to that point that it becomes so irrational and so inflamed. They think perhaps what they're doing, and I'm absolutely speculating, but this is morally right. And I think that's the difference when it comes to, I'm going to jump here just slightly, with Amy Coney Barrett recently, the difference based off of viewing law as it applies to justice or law as it applies to morality. And I think that there are different perspectives. I think that the Democrat Party in many ways looks at the court system as kind of a super legislature that's designed like, well, they didn't get it right in Congress, so we're going to fix it in the court and we're going to implement moral rights.
Yeah.
I mean, you can track the data when you see when Obergefell was passed. If I recall correctly, and I asked to be called out if I'm incorrect on this, but I believe if you check the polling when Obergefell was made to have gay marriage be legal in the United States, it was passed through that it wasn't even trending positive in California, let alone the rest of the country.
Yes.
So it wasn't a reflection. I'm not here to speak about gay marriage. I'm saying I'm here to underline the point that I think that when you have a perspective of judgments being passed from the perspective that moral decisions can be made right and made law, it's different than when things are based on tangible, visible doctrine, edicts, and law that states what these are rooted in. And that's
Right.
why I struggle. And I'm going to go there. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to bring it to right here. And I don't want to take us too far off the path tonight, but it's my fundamental problem. And it has to do with the language and the use of the idea. When people misuse phrases like systemic and institutional racism, and they build it into a phrase that's not accurate. Because what that does is that it starts to build up an amount of kind of rhetorical firepower, but it's like handing a bazooka to a 9-year-old.
Right.
They just love that it's going to fire something and make bright lights, and that's awesome. Not that they're using a weapon that can take life. And I say that because I think that's that danger. And I see it all in one path, Alex. I see it all in one path. You delegitimize it being a real threat. Oh, this is just an idea. It's not a big thing. Then people do things that they feel are morally right because they've had law shown to them to be, this is what is morally right. Congress didn't act, so we're just going to supersede them. So then what you do is and this is where I don't think people have thought maybe on the left about this from this perspective, well, we're just going to blow up the court. Okay, but by doing that, you're just delegitimizing the court.
Right.
You're not empowering it, you're delegitimizing it.
So
You're taking away the third part of government.
well,
You're taking away the checks and balance part of the government.
Right. Well, so here's the thing, right? And so I'm actually, this is exactly kind of where I wanted to go, because I think this is the bigger problem. I think the bigger sickness here is that, as we've stated many times on this show, the modern leftist movement is not a political ideology that is internally sound, that's based on historical fact, and there's a philosophy that can be followed. It is a religious belief. It's an ideology that has sins but no sinners. It doesn't tell you what's right and wrong until it decides what it is that day. It uses language that makes no real logical sense in from a political standpoint, but makes perfect sense from a religious standpoint. Going back to your point about systemic racism, right? I have asked on many occasions people who have made claims of systemic racism, like, okay, fine, can you show me how or what law is the issue? They'll say, well, it's not about the law, it's just systemic. It's in the system. I'm like, well, can you show me how? Because I can show you if something I believe to be racist, I can show you where it's racist and explain why I think it's racist and how I would want it changed. So I've always asked, where are the laws? What are the structures? How would you change it? I have never once gotten a real answer beyond, well, we have to take it down. Okay, well, what would you replace it with? There's never an answer to this because because in many ways this is the same language we use with from the Christian perspective of original sin, and that's an entire conversation meant for another show. But even that concept. But when we talk about original sin, it's like, well, there's original sin that all humans are born with, and that is why we are sinful. It is an explanation of something that is inherent to the nature of humanity. Now, we can show how it's expressed in sin and evil that we do, the violence and the lies and theft, but it is still it's a religious ideology that all humans are born with sin. This is the same concept, and they use the same language. So the problem that we have here is, as you said, because their ideology views them as correct, as moral, and then everyone who is against them is immoral. Let me ask you this, right? Where do we go? How does this end in anywhere beneficial? Because I'm going to say this. Explain to me how we're actually not already in a civil war. Tell me that you can't tell me that it's not violent. Now, those on the right are not being violent, but we've had several assassination attempts on political figures. We've had violent outbreaks on those who align themselves with the right, Trump specifically, over and over and over again. Countless times. I can't find more than a handful of instances where you could even allege violence from the right to the left, but there is a ton of evidence of violence towards not just conservatives but those on the right. And I think we need to point out that there is a substantive difference between conservatism and those on the political right now. We are reshaping the landscape of the American thought process. But how are we not already in? This is not the old-fashioned civil war that we're used to. It's not necessarily a hot war per se, in that there's actual military conflict. But this is. But please explain to me how there's a way to avoid this escalating when you have one group who has decided that they are the arbiters of all things true, all things good, and that anyone who disagrees with them is inherently evil.
Okay, so a couple things to unpack, and I want to make sure to address them. First and foremost, in my humble opinion, the way that we get through it is by speaking under honest intention. Now, that may sound super easy and just reductive, but I want to dig into this. By honest intention, I mean that we use words as to what they accurately mean. Earlier, what I was saying was where I struggle is the application of words that don't directly address what the topic is. I very much believe that there is racism in human culture. I firmly recognize that I've known people that have openly had views. Now, where we need to dig a little deeper is to say, I know people that consider themselves progressive liberals who base much of their decision-making process off of race. Does that make them racist? Now, the traditional value we get with racism is that bigoted approach. Oh, you're Hispanic, you can't do this. Oh, you're Black, you can't do this. Oh, you're Italian, you're Catholic, you're Jewish, you're gay, you're dead. That's not all necessarily racist, but you know it. It's an ist of any kind, right? Now, If someone is a practitioner of using race, it's why so many people have tied the correlation together that the very well-known white supremacist Richard Spencer, an actual dyed-in-the-wolves, actual racist, white supremacist, he aligns so much with a lot of the philosophies that you're seeing coming out of the hard left. There's a viral YouTube video that's been going around for a while, and it shows these two guys and they're sitting next to each other, and they're both wearing pink t-shirts, and one says racist and the other one says woke.
Yes.
And they're both literally agreeing with each other at the same time about motives. And it's satirical to prove the point. I believe we need to have honest intent, have language, and we need to speak intelligently as members of a knowledgeable citizenry. We have to speak with words that we understand. Words like systemic racism mean things. I would argue the point that we have systemic anti-racist policies in place in many ways. I will provide an example in something like affirmative action, or certain discrepancies that you see based off of socioeconomic status. Not that that's directly related to race, but there are certain things that present themselves at certain different socioeconomic levels and tiers. Now, what I would say is, if we're speaking with honest intent, then we will use words to mean what they mean, not to try to sound smart, not to get a lot of likes, but to say what they mean. I happen to believe that racism is something that is present in our culture. I don't like that. I stand against it. And I feel like it's nothing but fueled ignorance that we need to be able to discuss, address, create better ideas, better dialogue, expose it for what it is, root it out, and move on. However, when we institutionalize things and start systemically claiming that there are things like, you will not be successful because of this, and here's the reason why, and there's no backlog or defining qualities to what that is, that's very dangerous. And I can't imagine how negatively impactful that must be for someone to hear that. Gee, I'm sorry you were born looking like this. Your life's going to be garbage. I fundamentally don't dare want to live in a country like that. I'd rather live in a country that had a very wise man once say to those open-minded, upon wanting to live in a country where children were based off the content of their character and not the color of their skin. We've said that many times on this show, but it's so funny because I think now, in some ways, it's almost to say, I want you to acknowledge how my race is significant about who I am in every possible way, but I don't want you to speak about it or address it, because to do that delegitimizes it if you're not the same race. And I think that's a dangerous path to walk. I think we just need to recognize each other as people. Second point, I want to get to the concept of honest intent, and using appropriate, accurate language is something that you once said years ago. You said, because we have to be careful, because many of those on the left believe the concept that there are no criminals. There are crimes, but no criminals. And yet it's funny because Trump has been the one to pass prison reform. And yet somehow he's this one that's missing the boat on this, when it wasn't the 1994 crime bill that used words like super predator. That was the other guy running. And it's interesting to see how that dialogue just gets swept aside. And I think lastly, to your point about whether, first, or to conclude my second point, there are crimes, there are criminals, they need to be charged and held accountable. All of a sudden in the news, you're starting to see the stories creep out finally, but Minneapolis is going, whoa, time out, cowboy, this is not what we want. And the own city council is now backing down because they realize, oh wait, if we take away the police, crime doesn't seem to stop. In fact, there's an inverse relationship and it goes up. Wow. I'm not a mathematician, but if you have 10 X's and 10 O's, and then you have 5 X's and 10 O's, I'm willing to bet the O's are going to score more points. I'm not Vince Lombardi, but I can guess. And lastly, I would say, to the point about whether or not we're in a civil war, I want to be very careful, because again, I think it's not that you personally are trying to inflame the language, but I think that is inflammatory when we look at it that way. What I would say is that I think we are experiencing a cultural shift unlike anything we've certainly seen in my lifetime. And I think that it's something that we need to consider, because the differences before, as we've discussed offline, have been the right or the Republicans had a system of values and beliefs, and they identified with these institutions, where they stood on abortion, where they stand on gun rights, where they stand on the First Amendment, where they stand on government, where they stand on trade, national defense, border security, whatever. And then it used to be like, well, the Democrats stand on this policy and this governing body and this principle. And now what it seems like is now it's an attack on the concept of holding institutions with value. How do you view the Catholic Church? Doesn't matter. It's an institution, and I have an iconoclastic perspective, and therefore the institution needs to be torn down because institutions are racist. Again, before institutional racism. And therefore, now if we can just tear down all of the institutions, we'll be done with racism. If we can just get rid of the guns, violence will stop. Nope. I think you'll just see an increased number of stabbings or punchings or shooting people with little rubber band guns or, flicking them in the ear and running away. I think that there is something we have to seriously address, and that is we've got to be able to speak with honest intent. So what's the last step that I think has been really negatively affected? What you do when you can't overcome all those other things, meaning you've tried to have dishonest arguments, but people still try to provide truth. You try to, not look at the fact of there being crime or criminals. You try to undermine the concept of civil institutions, whether it's watching sports or standing for the flag or singing the national anthem or whatever. You do the very last thing. You take away the ability to argue. So when you shut down language, that's how you can control it. And that authoritarian perspective, from my point of view, is very much alive on the left, because I think that they lean into the moral perspective of law, and they support it with a belief structure that government exists to give you your rights, not that government exists to provide, secure, and defend your God-given rights that you already have.
So I have really 2 points here. Again, they're not necessarily counters to use, but slight pushbacks, because I did ask one question that sort of got not necessarily sidestepped, but not directly addressed as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to sidestep. I literally
I know.
Or I went in a different direction. What's the direct question?
So the direct question I asked, and this is why I think there's sort of an important point here, is I said, how can we, because again, as I've clearly stated, we are not calling for anything. We're not calling for violence.
Right.
But my question is, how are we not already in like you said that this is just a very radical cultural shift. But I am pointing to the very real violence that is perpetrated by the left to the right. How are we not already in some form of civil war?
So excuse me, I'm hopping. I didn't answer that directly. I think it's a cultural shift that we're seeing through our country in terms of ideals, which I think can sometimes be even more dangerous than a hot war, because the hot war, you're kind of solidified in your beliefs and you're kind of shooting it out, I think. With a cultural one, you're kind of shifting it from an ideas perspective. What I would say is, the reason I think that we're not at the state that it's a civil war, and I will say this, I think there are many listeners right now, all 6, they could say, hey, wait a second, guys. I can think of a ton of things coming from the right. Kyle Rittenhouse, people coming down from these different places, the Proud Boys, all these people doing their thing. Come on, give me a break. I think the difference is this. I think that when it comes to the right, it's anecdotal. It's an experience. I think when it comes from the left, it's institutional. And I mean these words as they lie. I think from the right, it comes down from an anecdotal perspective. It's your one-off, two-off. This kid, Kyle Rittenhouse, being dragged into this thing, looking to sue the president for making these claims about him, to show that there's nothing having to do that his motivations had anything to do with race. They could have had something to do with, maybe not needing to be there, or discharging a weapon, X, Y, and Z. But the motivation that it had to do with race doesn't seem like there's evidence to suggest that. However, I would say this. I do believe that where there's it, let me address it from the angle that I said in terms of a cultural shift, I'll say it this way too. There's also a rhetorical shift. There's also an application shift. I believe when you see these one-offs from the right, it's not thematic, it's not institutional, and it's not systemic. I think when you see it from the left, they have seen, whether it's on a college campus, whether it's in the streets, or whether it's in politics, that it is about brute force. But that's also what they've seen as being effective. I heard somebody recently say, we get what we tolerate, something to that effect. And I think what we're dealing with now is appeasement, 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 appeasement. Oh my gosh, things got worse. It's peace in our time, right? You see, guys, I've got the sheet of paper. Hitler said he'd stop. Oh wait, he didn't. And that's where I think it is. So directly to the question, what are we not in a civil war about? Again, I want to be careful with that, because I don't think you have a unified front. Not that we're going to wear blue and gray and stand on opposite sides of the battlefield, but I think that we need to be very mindful when we start looking at it from that kind of perspective. Now, I think we need to combat these bad ideas with increasing awareness, activism from different perspectives. But I would say that historically speaking, you've seen violent protests and action from the left throughout all history.
So this is them doing what they do, is what you're saying.
I mean, how did look at the 1900s. The same way. I mean, people think that, the massive overthrow of the Russian oligarchs and the Russian powers that be when the Tsarina and the Tsar were murdered and executed, there weren't 17 million people that were doing that in Russia. It was smaller groups.
Yep. Maoist revolution.
So they just moved one dictator over for another because those policies don't work. The danger that we have right now, and people keep saying, oh, the institutions are weak and the constitutional crisis. I think things are working the way they are. We have a president who literally is almost incapacitated. I mean, he's trying to stay engaged and active, and that's fine. We have lots of senators. We're in the middle of an election, and we've got this, and we've got that, and there are wars in the world, and the economy, and there's COVID. The Constitution of the United States is still iron in its resolve. It's still moving forward, but it moves forward so long as we believe in it and are willing to fight for it. What's changing is where many of us still believe in institutions like the church, the Constitution, the concept of a family, the concept of marriage, the concept of compensation for fair employment, whatever you want to call it, education, the ability to discover and address ideas from a counterpoint and to have those points respected, even if severely disagreed with. And the concept of saying all of those things exist under a racist model of institutionalized slavery, racism, sexism, and all types of other isms. Therefore, we need to tear it all down. And to your previous point, I think you're absolutely right. There's not a single tear it down to build what? We're building, it's like we're building a staircase and we don't know what next step to build.
Right. And the problem is the people who are out front arguing for it don't know where they're going. The problem is it's the people behind them who do, and it's not where they think that it's going. But let me ask this.
Well, I don't think it's because I don't think we have leaders so much as we have managers. And I think there's a difference between a leader and a manager. And for those who have studied or read about that, those concepts and those points, I think that there's a difference. And I think that difference is very clear.
I'm going to disagree with you on this point. I think there are leaders. The problem is I don't think that there's necessarily leaders in the traditional sense. In fact, let me use this term for the left. I think we do have managers, but I think we also have provocateurs. I think there are people who do have a broader agenda. They know what they're doing. They, however, they're very slowly using these, let's be honest, what the Soviets called and deemed useful idiots, to achieve it. Let's go back to I want to push back on this one point that you made, and I think this is my biggest problem. I think this is why I personally cannot see this doing anything but escalating, and this is this. You said the very first step is we need to have an honest dialogue. Show me one leftist, not someone who's politically liberal, because they're on the right now. Please understand, we have political liberals who are now considered to be on the right. That's what I'm saying. Right and conservative are no longer the same thing. The political right has now grown to basically anyone who believes in things like individual freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, trying to rationally come to an actual conclusion where everyone, can discuss things and have an answer. The simple fact of the matter is, show me someone on the left with whom you can have an honest dialogue with.
Well, so, and without making it too anecdotal or too personal, I still want to maintain the beliefs there, even though there's a difference in philosophy. I want to go to something. I want to look at the comments real quickly. I literally just discovered after doing this show now for several months that in the comments section, you have people commenting. So I want to go to a comment because there's a really good point that's been raised. And I want to thank Stephen Buck for this. Stephen says, he's discussing the concepts regarding the conflation between inequality and inequity. And I think that is, many people look at those terms and they define them from the perspective of, the concept of result, right? Equity meaning that we have the same outcome. The example I've always tried to use when I talk about the difference between inequality and inequity, or equality and equity, I'll take it from the other perspective, is to say, you and I go out, and for people that don't know us, you are a burly man capable of great things physically. So for you to pick up a 200-pound barbell, I think you could probably sit down and wrap that out and be done with it. I tend to be a bit more on the petite side in relation to you in comparison. And so me doing that would be very much more challenging. So for you to throw on a backpack with 200 pounds in it and run off, there you go, tearing down the road. I'm going to do it differently. So the equality would be, we both are carrying the same mass. The different perspective that we could do it, or if it's based off of a male and a female, would be, okay, well, she's 5'2" and weighs 90 pounds soaking wet. I'm 6'2" and I'm 200 pounds. Well, if we want to create it based off of equity, you both need to carry 200 pounds. That's not equality. What we could do to make it equality would be to say you both need to carry 80% of your body weight. Now, what we're seeing is the concept of how equity versus equality is applied to outcome. And that's the danger, because we're trying to control outcomes with certain things. And if there is any discrepancy, you're seeing this now from people. This goes back to Stokely Carmichael and ideas going back, and Ibram X. Kendi is talking about stuff like this. With, if there's a variation in the outcome, it's because the process was inherently racist. That's my understanding of how it's being discussed in the public realm right now. I think that's very dangerous, because if you try to control outcomes, you have to manipulate variables along the way. And to Stephen's point, I think that it's a great topic to look at, that equality, whether you want to look at that as equality of access versus that of outcome. Well, in any given system, you can't possibly know the outcome. Yes, in science, if you split the atom, you're going to have a fission. Yes, what I'm getting at is if any two people come together to do something, unless you start warping standard conditions, you're going to start to see things start to bend. We're seeing this right now with regard to transgender sports. And you're starting to see how a lot of these things are being impacted by the concept of wanting to grant access through channels that didn't previously exist. But the outcomes now are coming out differently. So when you get someone like Ibram X. Kendi or going back to the 60s, whatever, that says if the outcome is therefore somehow disequal or disadvantageous in any direction, it is because of an inherent racist system or flaw to the process. I think that's a very dangerous place for us to be, because it creates an environment where we start bending metrics or standards or guidelines or expectations for the help of either wanting to nurture some type of personal need or nurture some type of social pressure. The best example that many people always want to talk about is females on the SEAL teams. I think it always should come down to what is the operational requirement. And if a female achieves it in such a way that a male cannot, then that is an instrument capable of executing a mission for mission critical success. That's it. Now, if they want to say that there is a standard for this organization and that's what it is, okay, then that's based off of that principle. But I think going back to the concept of your original question, that I want to bring in Stephen's point or Stephen's question, and I appreciate you guys for your comments out there, I think they do exist. I do believe people on the left, and I'm not talking about standard liberals, and I'm not talking about, you're voting Democrats. I think there are some people there that aren't so far down the path that need those better ideas, but they have been so overflown, the deluge of these bad ideas that have been sent to them with regard to things like equity and equality, and not being able to differentiate the difference. I remember being in college and listening to conversations about the differences between sex and gender. And in this impressionable age of, oh, well, I need to be open-minded. I mean, oh my gosh, am I the worst person ever? You just need a little more time in the sunlight, and you need to be able to back that up. So what I would say is, we have to be able to realize that before things get to that point that I think you're saying that we may be on the precipice of, I think we have to pull back the veneer. This goes back to my original point about honest intention, and have an understanding of these words. Because when you start misappropriating the meanings of words, it leads you down this path. That's what's dangerous. And trust me, the differences between words, great example. The differences between words like systemic and institutional versus not, the differences between equality and equity and understanding what those are, the differences between sex, gender, the differences between, X, Y, and Z, these are real things, but they've gotten lost because somehow we just think that the louder we say it, the longer we say it to enough people, it'll become the truth. And we all know the philosophies taught by people like that. And that's really dangerous.
I think it's a great place to end. In fact, I think, again, barring any great news this next week, I would like to continue this conversation because I think there is an interesting point to be made here. And I do like there's a slight bit of optimism to what you said, that there are people on the left for whom this conversation they're willing to have an honest conversation. We need to iron out some of the problems with the language so we can both all speak the same language, but that there are people on the left who would be willing to have that conversation. Unfortunately, to this point, I've not found them, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. It just means we have to try harder to find it. And we must, because if we don't, then it's going to get much uglier than what we've seen. I do want to talk about so just real quickly though, I want to talk about the Rittenhouse thing later on a different show, because there's a lot to there. And I think that goes back to sort of the point that the difference between violence from the right is almost always exclusively in self-defense prior to the other. But that's a conversation for another day. For right now, I just want to thank everyone who's watching, everyone who will watch later on. Again, we'll be back to our normal Thursday broadcast time, 9 p.m. Central Standard this week, assuming I don't, burst into flames or something like I did this last week. And other than that, I think we will see all you beautiful people on the flip side.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks so much for listening. And Alex, glad to hear you're feeling better. God bless to everyone, and keep chasing the light.